I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. It's not easy to brave the cold, to come out at 7:30 or 8 in the morning to hear some of the things that we think is essential to present to you, but we appreciate your being here. Divorce is a high-stakes situation for everyone that's involved. It is life-changing and perhaps one of the most stressful things that anyone can go through. People think they need to win in a divorce, but we have to define what win means. It will be different for every family, and the objective is how can we contain, not compound, the tragedy. And that is sort of the philosophy of what my team at Meyers tries to bring to the client, and what I think these lovely ladies that will be presenting with me also see the benefits in. Some think it's all about the financial issues, and certainly it is about the financial issues, but there's an emotional and intangible component that matters as well. It's a whole package of moving someone from one place to another based upon the circumstances that they're facing. Michelle and Barbara will define the ways that the emotion and the financial impacts a family that is breaking up. We will be discussing the preparatory steps to get someone ready to face the potential of a termination of marriage, as well as creating solutions for that situation. I'm going to add some of the legal elements which need to be considered in making sure that you come out of this experience as intact and secure as possible. Now, many of you in the room are here because of your professional capacity and maybe not your personal capacity. It's always difficult to give a presentation on divorce because it's a very personal thing, and people may not want to be in a public forum and be noted as being in that forum. People sometimes, when I'm in a restaurant, think if I'm with them, that means they're getting a divorce. And when anyone says hello to me in the office, everyone's afraid that there's something going on with my friend or a colleague. So we understand the privacy of all of this, and all of you kind of deal with that as well in your professional careers. Overall, we just want to provide you with enough information and strategies that you can help whoever you know, whether it be yourself or someone that you work with, to move on into the next chapter of their lives. So a year or so down the line, that person, that family, and the friends and family that surround that person will look at the person that's going through this with admiration and respect for the way that they went through all of this. So this is going to be informal. This is the least tech presentation you'll see in the 21st century. We have no PowerPoint. We're just going to be chatting, and we hope that everyone will add to the conversation, and we welcome questions. There are cards in front of each of you that you can write down your questions, and then we'll collect them whenever you have one, and it will then create a layer of personal protection for anyone who doesn't want a question to be answered and associated with them. So we appreciate, and interrupt us at any time. This is really a conversation. So first, I just want to introduce my team. Meyers Roman, there are 4 of us that work in the area of family law, and we truly are a team. Our philosophy is the client is first, and we are trying to move the clients through this process as quickly as possible so that they can move on to the next chapter of their lives. The delay does no good unless there's special circumstances for why we have to wait. So here today, and if you want to just stand up or wave, is Jennifer Singleton, Ann Fantelli, and Grace McLeod. And also here today is Gina Ciani, that is in the estate probate section of our firm as well. And as you can imagine, a lot of our conversations overlap between practice groups because divorce covers a lot of areas of law and a lot of areas of personal interest. So we need to know about real estate, we need to know about businesses, we need to know about retirement, we need to know about how to manage children and what the developmental process is for children that are going through divorce. It's a total package, what we have to do to help somebody through the process. And We do practice in 5 surrounding counties, so it's not just Cuyahoga County. We're very comfortable being in Lake, in Medina, in Summit, in Lorraine, and Portage. We do go farther than that, but it's probably better to keep it within the 5-county area. So our reach is out there. In the materials that we handed out to you, there's 2 different options for how to terminate your marriage. One is through a divorce, and the other one is through a dissolution of marriage. Each option has its own characteristics and its benefits and potential downsides. The Meyers-Roman Domestic Relations team will listen to the client's story and then direct and assist the client through the best process that fits their circumstances. We all know we can litigate in court. That's what we were sent to law school to do. Initiation of a court action may be the route that some people need and want to pursue. Sometimes the client needs a restraining order to preserve the status quo. Sometimes the client needs subpoena power to gather information and reaffirm what the assets and liabilities might be or the income might be. And sometimes the issue is physical safety, and we need to deal with that as well, and it's best dealt with in the course of the court. In such cases, we support filing litigation. But people often think that they need their day in court in order to be heard and understood. That option lets the court make the decision about the client's life. And I personally say, who knows the client or yourself better, you or the court? And obviously, it's the client who knows the situation and with the help of a team of advisors can sort out the best options and control the decision-making rather than putting it in the hands of the court. And most cases go to settlement anyways, so if only less than 5% ever get tried, why wouldn't going to the table to negotiate be the course of action that someone wants to take? So with active listening on the part of the legal, financial, and mental health professionals, you can achieve as much, and I would say even more, to do it in a dignified, respectful way and focus on your highest goals and interests while avoiding your deepest fears and concerns. And you're going to hear those words, highest goals and interests, and deepest fears and concerns a lot today because that's the message. I want to make the case for why a divorce doesn't necessarily have to be handled in a public courtroom. There are other options where decision-making will be made by the parties themselves, and the lawyers in the interdisciplinary team will focus on the stated interests and goals and deal directly with them. We don't get stuck on positions that cause more discord and more expense. We dig deep into understanding what the client's needs are. Divorce creates a lot of uncertainty. No one truly wins in a divorce, we all know that. But by steering the client and the family through the uncertainties, based upon trying to attain their highest and best objectives, we achieve the new definition of win. There's my message. We cannot lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of emotion, possibly anger, resentment, and disappointment, and sometimes even a sense of failure that surrounds the event of a divorce. After all, there's a reason why these people are separating. The client has a right to their feelings and to the expression of those feelings. And when you participate in a more open dialogue, a private process, we think the emotional needs and fears that can be so debilitating in a divorcing process can be best managed and help you make sound decisions, because the emotions are the ones that get in the way of the sound decision making. And that's why the court process can be such an impediment to getting a good outcome. Instead of closing doors, we try to keep those doors open by providing information, gathering all the information, brainstorming ideas amongst really good-intentioned colleagues and other parties, and restructuring and creating a resolution that will address financial security, better communication between the parties in the future, preservation of relationships, and especially when children are involved, making sure that the children are in a sound it's the same, it is a family, it's just a different family. So the point is, how we divorce matters. As lawyers, it's our job to keep you focused on the goals and the interests by fostering transparency. Everyone has to disclose all of the information that is relevant to making the decisions, to cooperate, and I can't stress enough, respect each other through the difficult conversations. People need to retain their dignity. The court process does not, and the divorcing process does not always maintain the dignity of the litigants. So whether it's a person that transgressed or the victim of a person, we need to help those people move on in a more constructive way, and that's the way we practice. As your lawyer, we're going to help give you the tools to understand your rights and your responsibilities and help create these options so that there's this successful transition. Whether it's litigation or a more amicable approach, the key is to concentrate not on stubborn positions, but to focus on these true interests and goals, dealing with the fears and concerns, to create this open dialogue and inquiry. Some parties have shared interests. They really do have the common concerns. In other cases, their interests are so divergent that also you can reach an agreement. In collaboration, we create value, we hope, for everyone. What really matters to you is what we ask. What do you think the other party cares about? What do each of you need? Where do we need to be flexible? Understanding this brings us closer to resolution, and we build trust between the parties and the colleagues so that you feel like we're really accommodating what you're trying to say. It's counterintuitive to think that people in divorce will just try to get along to get to a resolution, but I will tell you here and now, it works. So I'll give you an example. In a divorce where you have a pending case, the wife's lawyer is told by the wife that she is saying, we have to keep the house, we have to keep the house. And the husband is telling husband's lawyer, we have to sell the house. So those two lawyers march down to several pretrials in a row in front of the judge or magistrate, and they say, we're keeping the house, we're selling the house. And the court adds very little to that dialogue. It's just entrenchment, okay? And you spend a lot of time and money just holding on to your positions. That's a position. When you dig deeper into the interest for why someone is saying that or the fears for why they are, you find the wife is saying it because she has a 16-year-old son who she wants to see complete school in that school district, so she's not ready to move. The husband, on the other hand, is insisting on the sale because he can't afford to maintain this big house and pay for spousal support and child support and the debts that have been accumulated in the marriage. So, what do we do with that? When we find out the information, when we actually do hear what is driving these parties to their positions, we start brainstorming. And we come up with the idea of, wife, would you consider selling this house and getting a smaller house? And she said, I will if it's in the same school system. And we say to husband, if she'll help you get out of the saddle of this large financial house, will you help her get the smaller house? And his response is, yes, I want my son to finish school in that school district too. As you can imagine, in a typical court setting, it's not usual for that conversation to happen. And that is where this all starts. So as much can be gained by listening, and that's the key to this whole example. I'm going to give you one more example of why this process works. There's two chefs that were invited to an event here in Cleveland. It's a huge event. There's going to be 1,000 people at it. And they're both really excited about presenting their treasured food to this group. So there's a snowstorm, Cleveland. And they both, unfortunately, arrive late to Cleveland and don't have a lot of time to prepare their particular dish. They both need oranges. And when they go to the refrigerator of the venue, they find that there's enough oranges for one of them, but not for both of them. And they're in a complete tizzy because they have 1,000 people that are going to come in the door at 6 o'clock. They haven't even started the process, and what do? And they're bickering. They're like fighting. I need the oranges. No, I need the oranges. And where do you go with that? So they finally realize it's really starting to get late, and we got to do something about this. So they compromise, and their compromise is that they each take half the oranges. Problem solved, right? They both prepare their dishes. The one chef was presenting the main entree, and he had an orange sauce over his dish. And the orange sauce, the dish was good. The orange sauce was okay, but it wasn't as pungent as he would like it to have been. And the other chef is the dessert chef, and he was doing a cake with an orange sauce over the top of it. And also that dish was well received by the group, but he knew it wasn't his best work because the sauce there wasn't too good as either. So they realized that if they had talked a little bit further, had gone a little bit deeper into their conversation about what their needs and goals were, they would have had a far different outcome. Because it turned out that one of the chefs needed the rind and the other one needed the juice. This is an example, we believe, for why this approach is so different. We're advocating with our heads and our hearts for these people, but by listening to both sides, we can create constructive choices that will be tailored to the individual client's needs. Instead of a cookie-cutter approach, we use our knowledge of the law, our compassion for the client, and our professionalism, both with our clients and opposing counsel, to try to avoid this needless conflict. We create a safe environment. I had a case where a husband and wife knew what the law was, but they had a personal plan in their marriage that they wanted the wife to stay home and be there at 3 o'clock for the children. And she, now that she was facing divorce, needed to work full time and wasn't going to be able to be there at 3 o'clock. And husband was only going to be obligated to pay support for 5 years. They needed 8 years for the younger child to get through high school. And they felt in their marriage that the most important thing was for them to be able to parent throughout that high school experience. Husband actually agreed to pay 3 extra years of spousal support to meet that common interest and goal that they had. This is the kind of constructive work we can do if we really dig deep in. So we're looking at the present, we're building for the future. We really want to keep the client focused on what's important, not the emotion, not the anger, and avoid the win at all costs battle. In the end, we can predict with certainty the assets are going to get divided, the debts are going to be allocated, decisions are going to be made about child rearing. But as we embark on this journey down the road of divorce, the real question is, how do you want to get there and where do you want to end up? There are always compromises. So what I say to you is, let's change the picture of divorce. Let's find a way to help our clients, our friends, our family members, maybe even ourselves someday, successfully get through the process, come out of the other side as intact as possible, and recognize that they're in a place of happiness and health and security. So having said that, I want you to hear from these two lovely women who will add a dimension to the conversation that I haven't really spoken about yet. So Barbara, do you want to explain what you do?
Sure. How do I turn this on?
I don't think I ever did.
Yeah, I'd rather not, actually. Okay. Hi, I'm Barb Feinberg, and I am a psychotherapist / life coach with great emphasis on the life coaching piece. And I'm in private practice, and my practice includes a lot of people who are thinking about, in the midst of, or healing from divorce. And a lot of people that I see through the whole process. And what I thought might be useful was if I talked about one particular situation in some depth, and then talked to you also about a model that I have been trained in and learned a lot about and think can be very, very useful to couples who are on the brink of divorce. And so, a client that I've worked with, I think it's 6 or 7 years by this time, I saw her initially the day after she had decided to end her 18-year marriage. And she was very, very scared, very anxious about the decision, and very concerned about what was going to happen to her and her 4 kids. So in the course of our conversation, it was very clear to me from what she was talking about that this was a client who had high net worth and lived in a very comfortable and luxurious life, and was a stay-at-home mom. So the conversation that I had with her to start with was really about, tell me about your marriage. Tell me about what brought you to this point in this relationship. And as she talked about it, it was clear that this was a marriage where she had been subject to verbal abuse for pretty much the whole marriage. And so at that point, after 18 years of verbal abuse and being blamed for endless numbers of things, her self-esteem and her sense of her ability to manage was very, very narrow, very limited. And in fact, I think it was in the third session that I saw her, she said to me, "Do you think I need to get a job?" And I sort of chuckled about it because by that time I knew that we were talking in a situation where there were tens of millions of dollars at issue. I realized afterwards that what she was asking me was, will I be able to take care of myself and my kids? And she wasn't talking about money. She was talking about whether she was going to be able to manage as a single parent. And how was she going to manage the relationship with her soon-to-be ex-husband? So she spent time talking with me. She spent time talking with her lawyer. Sadly, she didn't know about you. And she spent time with her soon-to-be divorced husband, talking to a parenting coordinator. And happily, the process with the parenting coordinator moved forward much more smoothly than the conversation about money. And as you know, divorce is about two things. In most cases, not all. It's about money and it's about kids. So the couple were able to resolve with the parenting coordinator an agreement about how they were going to co-parent. And that included where they were going to spend holidays, who was going to be responsible for deciding on the dentist, whether the kids were going to go to church or not. Really, really, really highly detailed. The couple signed off on the agreement. And that piece was the piece that my client was the most concerned about and the most invested in and the most worried about. Once that piece was in place, then the negotiation about the finances was able to move forward in a much more smooth way. And I spent time with my client, with the lawyer, understanding what was happening, understanding what the strategy was for navigating this very complicated financial situation. And looking back, I'm aware of what a good triumvirate the parenting coordinator, the lawyer, and I were able to form. We communicated closely with one another. I understood what was happening so that I could help my client understand what was happening, and also so that I could communicate what concerns I was hearing to both the parenting coordinator and the lawyer. Of course, I had a release from my client to talk to both of those people, because the work that I do, as well as the work that I think everybody else in this room does, is highly confidential. So it's a process that, if in fact I have access to the lawyer, to someone who's involved with parenting decisions, I think that that team brings a lot to the table that otherwise is missing. And there are many situations with people who are like this client that I'm talking about, where I don't have that kind of access. And it's frustrating from my point of view because it limits my understanding of what the client is dealing with. And clients who are scared, anxious, hurt, disappointed, dealing with grief, they're not always the best communicators of what's going on, technically, if you will. So part of what I think is very important is that there be open communication between the various professional advisors. So that's one situation. And by the way, the divorce went forward after 2 years of enormously elaborate negotiation. They are co-parenting well together. They don't always see eye to eye. My client has become much stronger in navigating the relationship with her co-parent. She's also had to navigate the relationship with her parents, who were very angry and very upset about what was happening to their daughter. So they are players also in the situation. And I've met with them and my client to talk about the family logistics, if you will, the family dynamic, so that it could be as supportive to her and the kids as possible. So that's one piece. The second thing I want to talk to you about is a model that is called discernment counseling. Discernment counseling was developed by a guy who works as a professor at the University of Minnesota. His name is Bill Doherty. And I first heard Bill Doherty speak at a conference. And his speech was, we as therapists, couples counselors, really miss the boat when we're dealing with couples who are on the brink of divorce. In fact, he wrote a paper, which I read after I'd heard him speak, listing the various ways in which couples counselors make mistakes in dealing with those particular couples. And I read it, and I went, check, 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 check. Oh my God, I was making all those mistakes because the training that I had and the experience I had in working with couples really didn't take into account what was different about couples who are on the brink of divorce. So the model that Bill Doherty has developed, discernment counseling, involves a very specific protocol. I think of it as divorce decision counseling. Couples come for 5 or 6 sessions, sometimes less, depending on how the process goes. And in the course of the conversations, the emphasis is on what has your contribution been to the challenges that this marriage is dealing with. Because unless people understand what their contribution is to their situation, they're doomed to repeat it. And as I imagine you know, the divorce rate for second marriages is, I think it's somewhere around 70 or 80%. The divorce rate for third marriages is 90%. Those who forget history are doomed to relive it. So in this process, the protocol is talking to each of them on the phone first, making sure there's no domestic abuse, there's no addiction, and an active affair. When there's an active affair, the commitment has to be that that affair is going to end. It is not possible to really pay attention to what's happening in the marriage when there's an escape hatch as people see it and experience it. So once that screening is done, I meet with the couple, talk to them together. Then one of them leaves my office, my office is in my home, sits in my living room, usually plays with his or her phone, although I leave very important reading materials out. And the conversation I have starting usually with the person who's leaning out, the person who is the one who's initiating the divorce or initiating talking about divorce, and talk about what he or she is contributing. And that can be, I've really shut down. I don't find my wife attractive anymore. I'm not in love with him anymore. The kinds of things that you hear very frequently when people explain why they are getting a divorce. So listening to that and then saying, okay, so what have you contributed to the state of your marriage? And sometimes people are very receptive to that. Sometimes it's very difficult to tease something out. We, the spouse and I that I've just spoken with, report out to the other spouse whatever the central message has been. Then we reverse the process. I talk with the second spouse. At the end of each session, the couple decides whether they want to come back or not. And what this process can accomplish, there are three choices that couples have. One, they decide to leave things the way they are. They decide it's really not that bad, or they can't afford to do anything else, or they think they can work it out on their own. The second path, as Bill Daugherty calls it, is to move forward and get a divorce. The third path, which is from the stance of someone who sits in my chair, possibly more desirable than the others, not always, but possibly more desirable. The third path is, we're going to work on this marriage. I am going to work on my contribution to the challenges in this marriage in the context of couples counseling. And we are going to take divorce off the table for 6 months. If divorce continues to be on the table, then the coercive nature of those conversations is very destructive. And in fact, ends up very often being, well, I told you so. I told you this marriage is over. So that's the protocol. What I've seen very often, and it's been frankly a frustration to me because I now understand what the whole process is supposed to be, and I'm not sure whether it's me and I'm not really doing it quite right, or whether because when people come to talk to me, the person who's leaning out has really made the decision. And it's very difficult to sort of shake that loose. It's the, I'm not quite sure, I think this is what I want stance that really makes this much more viable. What I've seen over and over again, though, is one spouse says, this came out of nowhere, I had no idea you felt that way. And the other spouse says, I've been telling you this for years. So the miscommunication has been ingrained in this relationship for a very long time. What I've seen in the situation is that by the second or third session, the partner who has been resisting the divorce, as Daugherty calls it, the leaning in partner, that person has come to understand more about the dynamic in the relationship and has been able to begin to understand what the divorce means and to begin to accept the divorce. So even if the process is not useful in getting people to the point where they say, yes, I'm going to work on myself in this marriage, in couples counseling for 6 months, and we're not going to talk about divorce. I think even if that doesn't happen, I think the process is very useful. So what I've seen is, because I've then worked often with one or another of the partners, with acceptance or acknowledgement by the other partner that it's okay to do that, because as my two colleagues here in the front row, these are two people in a case consultation group. As we've talked about at great length, how do you navigate that? Because clients very often want to work with someone they've been comfortable with and find helpful. So that's another conversation. In fact, that's a conversation we have every time we meet, as a matter of fact. So this approach, I think, has great, great value and is very consistent, I think, with what Barbara's talking about. Because if couples are able to understand that they own a piece of what the problems are, then their stance is different from a stance that is only saturated with resentment and hurt and disappointment and grieving. And it's a grieving process that people go through. And what they're grieving is the loss of a particular kind of life. They're grieving, in many cases, a loss of financial security or stability. They're also grieving the loss of a dream. And it's losing the dream, I think, that is so central to the pain associated with divorce. So, those are the two things I wanted to talk to you about. And yes, question, yay.
Yes.
I love questions.
As many people in here, I'm a financial advisor, and we become financial advisors, we become confidants, we become kind of everything for them.
Right.
I currently have a client who's actually a psychiatrist. and she is
That
going-
can be real trouble.
That's actually going to be my question, because they are looking to go through a divorce. I've given them your name. But one of the things that, to me, is a challenge is when you are in the field, and it comes to life coach, how, I mean, obviously, I'm not in that field, but, obviously, I'm not in that field, but maybe some suggestions that you could give to me to be able to maybe give to them. I mean, at this point, I think she's so entrenched in being within the situation that it's difficult for her to be able, on one hand, she says, I know all of this. I'm a therapist, I'm a
Right.
psychiatrist, I'm all
Right,
of this.
right.
But she is in it herself, and the whole family, they're clients of mine. So I see how it is affecting the mother. I see how it is affecting the brother, who is a surgeon, and he's trying to counsel her. And I am kind of stuck in the middle, and I'm not a counselor, I'm just the financial advisor in the situation. So I can certainly speak to the finances
Sure.
portion of it. But part of me would like to be able, as a third party, because I'm outside of the family, to be able to say, hey, have you thought about maybe talking to so-and-so who is a life coach, and some things where she wouldn't automatically say, oh, I know enough about that, but do I need to talk to somebody?
Well, I think there are a couple of questions that you're raising. One is, to backtrack 1 second, the reason I like the notion of life coaching is that it does not pathologize. Psychiatrists in the business of diagnosing and treating pathology. Life coaching does not pathologize. So it's a very different stance. So it's a different expertise, if you will, than what your psychiatrist client has. That's one piece. Another piece I think that's really, really important and very central to the way I think about my work generally is, and Barbara's really touched on it, is what are the values? What direction does this guy or this woman want to go in terms of family? What kind of parent does that person want to be?
Splitting the children. He takes one and she takes one.
I see.
Which-
Have they read about Solomon?
Right.
Yeah.
But I see what is happening with the whole family, and the grandmother in particular, she's heartbroken.
I think thinking about your situation, the situation you're describing as needing a team effort is really important. The parenting piece, for example, a parenting coordinator is trained and is expert in helping people think through what's going to be best for the kids. In addition to which, the parenting coordinator in particular that I've worked with sees the kids and evaluates the kids. And so he can make a recommendation about the kids based on his training and knowledge. So there's that piece. The second piece is the counseling, the support for the emotional piece that's going on. So I see you.
So Barbara, what I
struggling.
want to say to that is the surgeon wouldn't do surgery on themselves, and to some extent, you have to convince your client that the team approach is really the solution here. Lawyers do some of the work that both of these ladies engage in, but why recreate the wheel with me? It's the team that helps get the person to the most viable outcome. And you just need to convince them to
She
step.
has gotten, the daughter, the one that is the mother, in this case, not, so it's the grandmother, the daughter who is the mother, and then the father. She has become so depressed that she is now at a point where she's no longer going to work. She's starting 20 projects and not finishing one, and it's a whole,
So that person isn't moving on to their next best life, and they're not doing it at a pace that's going to help them. What we
Right.
try to do is move, not take a year and a half or 2 years to get them to that place, but to really not push the pace if they can't do it, but to make sure that they're moving along in a steady, forward-thinking kind of way. So I hope that helps you.
One more comment, one more observation, and that is, in my experience, people who are depressed, who are paralyzed to the degree that you're talking about, or even less paralyzed, it's not sufficient to say, you need to be talking to somebody. What you need to do is say, you need to talk to this person, or here are 2 or 3 people for you to talk to, because they don't have the resource, the emotional or the energy level, to find the right resource for themselves.
Right.
I think that's a really important piece for anybody, friends, family, whether we're seeing them as professionals or whether we just have a meaningful relationship with them, to say, you need to be talking to somebody, and this is what you need to be doing, who you need to be doing it with. So,
Totally agree, and managing the emotion is the big key to all of what we do here, what everyone does when dealing with a client. So divorce, sometimes people have thought about for a long time before they come to any of us, and sometimes divorce comes out of the complete blue. So, Michelle, I would like you to speak as to how you deal with a client, whichever way that person may present to your group.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So I would say, unfortunately, a lot of times we're in a position that we get somebody that is right in the very beginning of the stages of going through a divorce. And we would love to be able to get in front of that if there's ever a possibility. So just to reiterate what both Barbaras have said, we're talking about a dream here. Their dreams are all of a sudden shattering around them. And so how do we start to help that person understand what this new life is going to be like? And really, I think that's one of the things that we really try to focus on at Luma, and that is about the person and centering that person. It's not about the finances. So you think that we do wealth management. The wealth management just helps you manage your life. So we're here to, our value is really to inspire families to be the best of themselves, and that's really our goal. So when we think about this whole family dynamic, we are there to help shepherd these people through this process. And in the very beginning of the stages, you go through, like you said, it's grief. You're going through the denial, the isolation, the anger. You see that whole spectrum, depression that you were talking about. So how do you actually help people get through that? And it's really taking a step back and finding out, okay, what is that value to that client? And understanding what's important to them. So I loved your example, Barbara, where you were using, they want to sell the house, and she wants to keep the house. I can't tell you how many times we've seen something like that. We have a woman that wants to keep the house because that's where she's raising her children. They're in that school district, and he says, no, I want to sell it because they're trying to divide up the assets. Well, in some cases, our job is to really take a step back and help her see that whole picture and say, do you really need the house? The house is a lot of maintenance. There's a lot that goes with it. And it's showing them almost that other side. And to your point, it's even if you're in that certain profession, you become blinded. You can't see what's in front of you. Part of our job is to help create that and show that for you. Show that you can actually get through this new stage in life from a financial picture, but also in enlisting other professionals like these two and creating that team. So when we look at folks going through a divorce, the number one thing that we first tell you is create that team for yourself. So who do you want to be that person that is your financial advisor, but that you're also taking that person along that can give you a nice sounding board? But how does that person actually partner with other people, such as a divorce attorney or a psychologist or psychiatrist, or even somebody that might be looking at how do you help that person become more just mentally aware of what's happening, or mentally, I guess you would say, like freshen themselves, take care of themselves. And that's such an important piece that I think a lot of advisors miss, because they are so concerned about looking at just the financials. Let me take the financials, divide them up, this is what you get, and you're going to be fine. No, it's so much more than that. It's actually looking at how are we going to divide them up that's going to be meaningful to you and to your kids, and what that long-term picture looks like. So, I mean, just I think a couple of statistics that I'd love to share with you. It's very frightening, especially when people go through a divorce. And you're actually looking at, when we talk about overall married women, 57% of them feel that it poses a financial risk. If you are someone that actually works at home or has been a homemaker, it goes up to 71%. They understand that their life is going to change dramatically. And about 36% that do go through a divorce of women that have never worked, 36% actually face a reduction in their overall standard of living. So it does go back to that dream, right? And that loss. And people get very clogged down into not realizing or paralyzed what they should be really looking at. And that's what we do. We break that down for them and show them, you're going to be okay. We might have to actually reestablish a new budget, but we can do this for you. I think a lot of times people will say, what's maybe the hardest time that you see somebody going through a divorce? And none of it's easy, right? Whether it's the beginning, middle, or end. But I think the beginning is probably very hard because it's something that's very new. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. You want to win, and sometimes you don't really understand what you're trying to fight for and what you're really focusing on. And that's what we're here to help you do, is to take that step back and say, okay, let's look at all the facets of your life. And from an emotional standpoint, what do you need? From a financial standpoint, what do you need? How are we going to take care of your kids? What's important? So I think that's maybe the main difference that we really take when we actually work with clients. We have some clients, I'm just thinking of someone that we had worked with, and she was taken aback. She wasn't expecting it. All of a sudden, her husband pretty much came home, and he was living an alternative life, and she had no idea. Mm-hmm. She had children that she was putting through college, and all of a sudden, she was in a position of, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my home. My kids are, semi-grown, but I still am going to have to take care of them. Where am I going to live? Can I even eat? And those were things that we really helped her through. So one of the things I would say that we're great at is trying to make sure we learn, connect, and celebrate with our clients. We try to make sure that they learn and educate so that they can feel comfortable and make good, sound decisions. We also try to connect them with people that with other clients or other women that are like-minded. So if they've experienced something, we try to help put them in touch with others that have gone through some of that same experience, because we may be empathetic, but if we have not gone through it exactly like them, then it's different. And then we also try to make sure that we celebrate when they do have those milestones or those successes. So, for example, another client or a story that I'd like to share with you, it was a pretty nasty divorce. She ended up moving her kids across the country and back to Ohio. And as they were going through, she hadn't worked in years. And the fear of thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to have the same standard of living, I'm not going to be able to put my kids through school, what am I going to do? And a year later, she went back to school. She's going to get a degree. She actually bought her first car on her own with the help of one of our advisors. And she was on the phone with him. It was great, saying, okay, how do I need to negotiate this? And he helped her through it. And I think that's the main difference. And she ended up taking a picture of her new contract and sent it to him. It was great. So I think it's really going through all those different stages, but we are here to help you figure out how you'll do it financially, but we're pulling in all of the experts to make sure that you actually do it and live that intentional life, not just live a life.
So we're talking here about redefining what a win is and how we get to that. We don't problem create, we try to problem solve. And I don't think we know today what the work that we do, what the impact will be later. We sometimes see some immediate relief of emotion or stress or whatever and some stability, but we can't truly understand what the impact is going to be. So I'll tell you a quick story. About 10 years ago, I unfortunately lost my father, and I was getting a lot of condolence cards at the office, wishing me well. And I was opening them and appreciating the people that were reaching out to me. And one of the cards that I opened up one day When I opened it up, all of a sudden, all this graffiti fell out of the card. And I was like, what's this? And it turned out it was graduation hats from a young man who 12 years ago, I handled his parents' divorce. And in the card that he wrote me with the announcement of his graduation was a personal note to me. I never met him. A personal note to me that said, thank you so much for having the insight to arrange for the custody arrangement that you arranged in the divorce, because my father's family has been my solid rock for the last 12 years. And I wouldn't be graduating from high school and going on to college if you hadn't done what you did. I hadn't thought about that case in a decade or more. And it just totally brought me back to why we do these things. Because that's what we're working for. We're working to help these people move on to something different. I had a client who was very, very distressed by the fact that he was getting a divorce. He still loved his wife and he wanted to stay in the marriage, but she wanted to move on. And they had some wealth, and she hired counsel that was going to fight to the death for whatever she could get for her. And the client he really wanted to work collaboratively. He tried so hard to keep the conversation at the table as opposed to court, and we couldn't do it. In the end of the day, the wife got what she was going to get. It wasn't a big epiphany that happened as a result of the court filing. But what they went through to get there, and he spent so much money for our firm to represent him. And all he said at the end of the day to his wife, begging her to still negotiate peacefully, is all I want is peace and harmony. I mean, no one really wants what is going to happen. Even the person that initiates a divorce isn't really saying, I want to get divorced. They're just saying they want to move on to a different, better life. And so that's what we're trying to suggest to everyone, is there's a way to do this that can be done where you can plan. I mean, you have business owners probably that you represent just in the regular course of the work that you do that are smart business people, smart professionals.
Oh, absolutely.
But they can't see the forest through the trees when they're faced with that emotional cross in the road.
Yeah, there's actually a study out there by the Financial Wellness Institute that shows that when people are going through a financial stress like this, they actually lose 13% of their cognitive decision-making. So their IQ drops 13%. And think about that. So when you actually are talking to these clients, how many times have you, or a friend, how many times have you been talking to them and they don't remember? They completely forget. Or they're not being able to make a sound decision. And I think that's one of the things that we can do when we're working with attorneys, is to help show that picture from a financial standpoint, because people just see a number. We can actually break that down so that people can actually see that picture almost as a tangible, not just this dollar amount that's hanging out there that they have put in their head that they need.
And sometimes, and the children are in the midst of this.
Yes.
Because in this particular case that I was talking about, it was exactly like you said. She wants to keep the house, he wants to sell it. She wants the kids to keep on going to the same school. He wants to change schools because he feels that he's not going to be able to afford a place where it's going to be. So we have talked through all that. And now we are at the stage where she's self-medicating. So she is putting her own prescriptions in. So it's a bigger picture, than the husband even realizes. And he's the one that started the divorce. He wants the peace associated with it. She really doesn't. She just wants to win, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So it becomes difficult because their children are 12 and 9, and the children feel an obligation toward the mother, especially one of the girls,
Sure.
And so it's how do you help them, surmount this type of thing, because you become the confidant and you talk about all the various things apart from the finances, obviously. At the end, obviously.
That's
I'm
gonna
be
support
helping you
it.
with the finances,
Yeah.
but.
I think to what Barbara said is to almost give that name to them and say, I'm going to try to help you.
Right. One thing to keep in mind is the biggest predictor of children of divorce who grow up and have serious problems is that they are caught between the two parents. They're caught as message carriers. They're caught as people who have to decide who they're loyal to. And that is so destructive to kids. That's why having a parenting agreement, excuse me, parents are going to be in a relationship for the rest of their lives. And so understanding that this isn't just going to be over when it's over, it's never over because they have kids. It's a very, very serious and difficult challenge to get people to the place where they understand what their responsibilities are as parents and what their values are as parents. And unless that's explicit, they run into catfights all the time. So.
Yeah, and I would say I think that's one of the biggest issues when people go through the divorce. If you're looking at that last stage, it's how do they enter almost back into a new social setting, and that's not just for themselves, but that's for their children. So I think that's also something that we're always trying to look and help clients do is find some of those new ways to enter back into this new life on a different social setting for themselves and their family, because it is difficult, it's different, they are feeling somewhat isolated.
And it's about problem solving. I had a case of 90-year-olds who are getting divorced, and we're seeing like gray divorce. I mean, it's a common thing today. We live longer than we ever have in history, and we're married longer potentially than we would have been centuries ago when people died at age 35. So these 90-year-olds were getting divorced because the children actually thought that mother was in an unsafe situation and wanted to protect her. And the husband was just completely distraught. Oh, they probably both still loved each other after 60 years of marriage or whatever. But the problem could have been solved with a conversation. I attempted to do that, but with some estate planning and some, it really was more of a probate estate planning issue than it was a divorce. We needed to get the parties in a safe place to make sure that there was enough finances for, both of them to resolve whatever concerns there were about security. And so when I walked into the magistrate's office for the final hearing, the magistrate said, "What were these guys, waiting for the children to die?" So there's never a good time, and it doesn't matter how old your children are. It's still an impact on everyone. There's bumps in the road through this more collaborative process. You're still divorcing. There's still hard issues. But I think with honest feedback from professionals and the support of professionals, you can help people get to what I want to call a new definition of winning. So we thank you all for coming, and if anyone has questions, we're certainly here to answer them. But we all hope that you see now another way to approach these problems when you face people that are facing the issues. So thanks.